Jacob Stone was mapping dead worlds when the emergency signal reached him. A red flash on his console that meant only one thing. Humanity was in trouble, had been alone on the survey ship Neptune for 3 months, charting empty systems on the far edge of known space where no one expected to find anything useful. But the work suited him because it kept him away from the politics and games that seemed to follow him everywhere else. The message from Fleet Command was short and brutal. Return immediately to Earth Station Alpha. Maximum speed. Classified mission of highest priority. And then 3 words that made his blood run cold. Species survival critical. Stone had seen those words only twice before in his 20-year career, both times when alien contact had gone very wrong. And he knew that whatever waited for him back home would change everything. Jump back to Earth took 18 hours, and Stone spent every minute trying to guess what kind of disaster could threaten all of humanity at once, because that was what species survival critical meant. Not just a war or a failed colony, but something that could end human civilization forever. When he docked at Earth Station Alpha, he noticed the unusual activity right away. Too many military ships, too many officers moving with the kind of purpose that came from desperation, and the complete absence of civilian traffic that normally filled the station's busy corridors. Admiral Claire Bennett met him at the airlock personally, which was another bad sign, because admirals did not personally meet commanders unless the situation was beyond desperate. And the look on her face told Stone that whatever he was imagining was probably not bad enough. She led him through corridors filled with hurrying officers to a secure briefing room where the walls were lined with screens showing star maps and alien ship designs that Stone had never seen before. And in the center of the room sat a single chair facing a holographic display that showed the faces of 12 different alien species. Bennett activated the display and began to speak in the flat, emotionless tone that military officers used when delivering news that might break the person listening. 30 days ago, humanity had been summoned before something called the Galactic Council for Judgment. 12 species that made up this council had been watching human expansion into space for the past 50 years, and they had decided that humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent to be allowed to continue existing as a free species in the galaxy. Stone listened in growing horror as Bennett explained that the council had given humanity exactly 30 days to send a representative who could convince them that humans deserve to live. And if that representative failed, the 12 species would combine their fleets and systematically destroy every human world, every human ship, every human settlement, until nothing remained but empty space, where humanity once lived. The previous human ambassador, a man named Kevin Walsh, who had spent his entire career in diplomatic service, had died during the preliminary negotiations under circumstances that the aliens refused to explain, leaving behind only a collection of notes that made little sense and seemed to suggest that the challenge was far more complex than anyone had realized. Stone studied the faces on the display, trying to read expressions that were completely alien to human understanding. Beings made of living crystal, others that looked like giant insects, creatures that seemed to be made of pure energy, and things so strange that his mind struggled to accept them as real. Bennett handed him a data pad containing everything humanity knew about the 12 species, which was pathetically little considering they would decide the fate of 8 billion human lives. And Stone realized that he was looking at the most impossible mission in human history. The Admiral explained that Stone had been chosen because of his unique background. He had served as both a military officer and a diplomatic negotiator. He had experience dealing with alien psychology from his work in first contact situations. And most importantly, he had a reputation for finding solutions when everyone else had given up. Stone looked at the countdown timer on the wall showing 27 days, 14 hours, and 36 minutes remaining until the final negotiations began, and he knew that no amount of preparation could possibly be enough for what he was being asked to do. Would have to travel to a neutral station in deep space, face 12 alien species that had already decided humanity should die, and somehow find words that would change their minds about the entire human race. The weight of it hit him like a physical blow. He was not just representing his government or his military. He was carrying the hopes and dreams and continued existence of every human being who had ever lived or ever would live. Had been asked if he would accept the mission, and Stone found himself thinking about his sister back on Mars with her 2 children, about the colonies full of people who had no idea their lives hung in the balance, about the billions of humans who were going about their daily lives while their species faced extinction. Looked at the alien faces on the display one more time. Creatures so different from humans that they might as well have come from different universes entirely. And then he gave the only answer he could. Yes, within hours, Stone was aboard the fastest ship in the human fleet, a sleek vessel called the Meridian, with a crew that had been handpicked for this mission. And as they prepared to jump into hyperspace toward an uncertain fate, he began studying the files that would either save humanity or help him understand why they were doomed. Stars stretched into lines of light as the Meridian entered hyperspace, carrying the last hope of the human race toward a meeting that would determine whether humans would continue to explore the galaxy or become nothing more than a footnote in alien history books. The diplomatic station appeared on the Meridian screens like a massive metal flower, blooming in the darkness of space, its 12 arms stretching out from a central hub where the final negotiations would take place. And each arm housed one of the alien species that would judge humanity. Stone stood on the bridge, watching the station grow larger as they approached, and he felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on his shoulders like a mountain that threatened to crush him into dust. Captain Ryan Torres had been unusually quiet during the 3-day journey, and Stone knew that the captain understood exactly what failure would mean. Not just the end of human civilization, but the end of everyone they had ever known or loved. Lisa Harper joined Stone at the viewing window, her face pale as she stared at the alien structure that looked like nothing humans had ever built. All curves and organic shapes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Had spent the entire journey studying the files that Kevin Walsh had left behind, trying to decode the scattered notes and half-formed theories that the dead ambassador had recorded in his final days. And what she had found was deeply troubling. Walsh had written about the impossibility of communicating with beings who thought in ways that human minds could barely comprehend, about trying to speak to creatures for whom time moved differently, for whom individual existence held no meaning, for whom the very concept of negotiation was as foreign as breathing water. As the Meridian docked with the station, Stone felt the artificial gravity shift slightly, reminding him that he was no longer in human-controlled space, but in a place where alien science and alien rules aptly. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and Stone stepped into a corridor that was clearly not designed for human comfort. The walls curved in ways that made his eyes water. The lighting came from sources he could not identify, and the air carried scents that his brain refused to process. A being waited for them in the corridor, tall and graceful with skin that looked like polished silver and eyes that held depth Stone could not fathom. And when it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere. One seat introduced itself as resonance of deep waters, representative of the Velhari, and Stone realized he was looking at the only species that had not voted for humanity's destruction, the one slim hope in a council filled with those who had already decided humans should being led them through corridors that defied human understanding of architecture, where walls became floors and ceilings disappeared into misty distances, until they reached a vast chamber where the 12 species had gathered to observe the human delegation. Stone had studied pictures and videos, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing before creatures that represented millions of years of evolution. Along paths completely different from Earth's, Zephyrians moved as one entity, their insect-like bodies connected by streams of bioelectric energy that pulsed with their collective thoughts. And Stone realized that trying to negotiate with them meant speaking to an entire civilization. At Ansa, the Archons sat motionless as living statues, their ancient forms carved from some material that seemed to absorb light, and their eyes held the weight of eons, as if they had watched stars being born and dying while humanity was still learning to make. Fereth Koroth delegation bristled with barely contained aggression, their reptilian forms covered in natural armor that bore the scars of countless battles. and Stone could see in their yellow eyes the warrior spirit that had carried them across the galaxy. In conquest, each species presented its own impossible challenge, beings of pure energy that communicated through color changes, crystalline entities that thought in mathematical harmonies, creatures so alien that his mind struggled to accept them as real. Stone stepped forward to address the council, using the formal greeting protocols that human diplomats had developed over decades of alien contact, but the response was immediate and devastating. Complete indifference. If aliens did not react to his words, did not acknowledge his presence, did not even seem to notice that he was there, and Stone realized that everything he knew about negotiation was useless. Her resonance of deep waters approached him after the disastrous first contact, its silver features showing something that might have been sympathy, and it spoke words that chilled Stone's blood. Your predecessor understood too late that you speak as individuals, while we here as Eternishith. Valhari explained that each species experienced existence differently. The Zephyrians thought as a collective consciousness. The Archons measured time in geological ages. The Koroth respected only demonstrations of strength, and trying to address them all with the same approach was like trying to speak 12 different languages simultaneously. Stone returned to his quarters that night knowing that he had learned something crucial. This was not a negotiation in any human sense, but something far more complex and dangerous. Spread Walsh's notes across his desk and began to see patterns in the dead ambassador's increasingly frantic observations. Humanity was not being judged by human standards, but by alien concepts of harmony, destiny, and cosmic balance that no human had ever fully understood. 12 species were not evil or cruel. They were simply so different from humans that they might as well have been gods trying to decide the fate of insects. And the terrifying truth was that from their perspective, they probably were. Stone studied each species individually, trying to understand not just what they wanted but how they thought, how they processed information, how they made decisions that affected entire civilizations. Zephyrians valued collective harmony above individual survival. The Archons sought cosmic balance across vast spans of time. The Koroth respected strength and honor in battle, and each species had its own incomprehensible system of values that would determine humanity's fate. Stone worked through the night. He began to understand why Walsh had died. The man had tried to be everything to everyone to satisfy 12 different alien psychologies simultaneously, and the impossible task had literally driven him mad. But Stone also began to see something else in the notes, a pattern that Walsh had discovered just before his death. The 12 species were not as united as they appeared, and their decision about humanity was part of a larger conflict about the future of galactic civilization itself. The countdown timer on his wall showed 24 days remaining, and Stone knew that he had to find a way to speak to gods in a language they would understand, or humanity would become nothing more than cosmic dust. Stone spent the next week doing something that no human diplomat had ever attempted. He stopped trying to speak to the council as a group and began learning to communicate with each species. Individualator Harper helped him analyze the bioelectric patterns of the Zephyrians, and they discovered that the insect-like beings responded to mathematical harmonies and synchronized breathing patterns that mimicked their collective consciousness. Work 18 hours a day. Stone practiced modulating his voice to match the frequency resonances that the Zephyrians used to share thoughts, and slowly he began to understand that speaking to them meant joining their mental harmony rather than imposing human concepts. Upon Archons presented a different challenge. Beings who thought in spans of millions of years found human urgency incomprehensible. So Stone learned to speak of humanity's brief existence as part of a larger cosmic symphony that required their unique contribution. Studied ancient philosophy and cosmology, learning to present human achievements not as individual accomplishments, but as notes in an eternal song that would be incomplete without humanity's particular frequency. The Koroth were easier to understand, but harder to convince. They respected strength and honor, but they also feared humanity's unpredictable nature and tendency toward what they called chaos. Making Stone realized that he could not hide humanity's violent history, so instead he reframed it as evidence of warrior spirit and the capacity for honorable combat. Even when facing impossible odds, each species required a completely different approach. The crystalline Valdris responded to geometric logic and mathematical proofs. The energy beings called Lumina communicated through color spectrums that represented emotional states, and the plant-like Sylvani thought in terms of growth cycles and seasonal. Stone pushed himself to exhaustion, learning 12 different ways of thinking, 12 different languages of the mind, 12 different systems of values that would determine whether humanity lived or died. Harper watched him work with growing concern, as he seemed to fragment his personality, becoming different people when he practiced communicating with different species, and she worried that he might suffer the same fate as Walsh. But Stone had learned something that Walsh had missed. He did not need to satisfy all 12 species simultaneously. He needed to understand what they were really judging humanity for. Breakthrough came when he realized that the Council was not asking whether humanity deserved to survive, but whether humans could evolve beyond their current limitations and contribute something valuable to galactic civilization. Aliens were not monsters seeking to destroy humans out of hatred. They were ancient civilizations trying to decide if this young and chaotic species had the potential to become something greater than what they were. Stone requested a formal hearing before the Council, and this time he did not try to defend humanity's past actions or justify human nature. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He acknowledged humanity's flaws and proposed a path forward. He spoke to the Zephyrians in mathematical harmonies about how human diversity could strengthen collective consciousness rather than threaten it, showing them equations that demonstrated how chaos could create new patterns of organization. The Archons. He presented humanity's brief existence as a catalyst for change in a galaxy that had grown static, arguing that young species brought innovation and growth that ancient civilizations needed to avoid stagnation. He challenged the Korath with the idea that humanity's unpredictability made them valuable allies in a universe full of unknown threats, because chaos makers could adapt to situations that destroyed more rigid civilizations. For each species, Stone crafted a different vision of humanity's potential, not hiding human weaknesses, but reframing them as strengths that could benefit the entire galactic community. Presentation took 6 hours, with Stone switching between different modes of communication as he addressed each species in turn. And by the end he was exhausted, but hopeful. But his hope was shattered when the Council began arguing among themselves, their carefully maintained unity breaking down as fundamental disagreements about the future of galactic civilization surfaced. The Zephyrians accused the Archons of being too rigid in their thinking, while the Archons claimed that younger species, like the Zephyrians, lacked proper perspective on cosmic matters. Korath argued that all non-warrior species were inherently weak, while the peaceful Sylvani insisted that violence was a primitive response to problems that could be solved through patience and growth. Stone watched in fascination and horror as the 12 species revealed that they were not the unified judgment panel they had pretended to be, but rather a collection of ancient civilizations with deep philosophical differences about how the galaxy should be governed. A dozens of deep waters approached Stone after the session collapsed in chaos, and the Velhari's silver features showed something that might have been Aprovaldi being explained. That Stone had accomplished something remarkable. He had forced the Council to confront their own contradictions and revealed the artificial nature of their unity. But this revelation came with a terrible price. If the Council could not agree on humanity's fate, the default decision would be the one that required no consensus: complete extermination. Stone realized that he had stumbled into something far larger than humanity's survival, a fundamental crisis in galactic governance that had been brewing for centuries, and humanity had become the catalyst that brought ancient tensions to the surface. 12 species were split between those who believed in isolationist policies that kept dangerous young species contained and those who supported integration of new civilizations into galactic society. Humanity had become a test case that would determine not just their own fate, but the future direction of galactic civilization. For the next 1,000 years, as Stone returned to his quarters that night, he knew that he had succeeded in one way. He had proven that humans could evolve and adapt to cosmic challenges, but he had also discovered that the real challenge was not convincing the aliens that humanity deserved to live, but finding a way to bridge the philosophical divide between species so ancient and powerful that their disagreements could reshape the Galactic countdown timer showed 15 days remaining, and Stone knew that his next move would either save humanity by helping to heal the galactic community, or doom his species by becoming the spark that ignited a cosmic civil war. Stone began meeting with individual species representatives in private, something that protocol normally forbade, but which the chaos of the previous session had made necessary, and what he learned in those meetings changed everything he thought he knew about the Galactic Council. Archon representative, an ancient being called Eternal Witness, revealed that the Council's decision about humanity was not really about humanity at all, but about a fundamental question that had divided galactic civilization for millennia. Should advanced species guide younger civilizations or leave them to succeed, or fail on their own? Isolationists believed that interference led to dependency and weakness, that species needed to evolve naturally or not at all, while the integrationists argued that guidance and mentorship created stronger galactic community. Humanity had become the perfect test case because they were young enough to be shaped, but advanced enough to be dangerous if they chose the wrong path, and the Council's decision would set precedent for how the galaxy dealt with emerging civilizations. For centuries to cometh. Koroth war leader, a scarred veteran called Blood of Victory, explained that his species feared humanity not because humans were weak, but because they were unpredictable in ways that reminded the Koroth of their own violent past. Koroth had once been savage raiders who nearly destroyed themselves in endless wars before learning the value of honor and discipline, and they saw in humanity the same dangerous potential that had almost led to their own extinction. But Blood of Victory also admitted that he respected human military achievements and believed that with proper guidance, humans could become valuable allies rather than threats. Zephyrian collective consciousness spoke through multiple voices, creating harmonies that made Stone's head ache. But their message was clear. They feared that human individualism could disrupt the careful balance of galactic society. They also acknowledged that their own collective thinking had limitations, and they wondered if human diversity might provide solutions to problems that their unified approach could not solve. Each species that Stone met revealed hidden complexities and contradictions. The peaceful Sylvani had once been warriors themselves. The energy beings called Lumina had destroyed their original physical forms in ancient conflicts, and even the crystalline Valdris had histories of violence and mistake. Stone began to understand that the Council was not composed of perfect beings judging flawed humans, but rather of ancient species that had all struggled with the same problems that humanity faced. Outer Harper made a crucial discovery while analyzing Walsh's final notes. The previous ambassador had died not from alien action, but from the psychological pressure of trying to be everything to everyone simultaneously. Had attempted to create 12 different versions of himself to speak to 12 different species, and the mental strain of maintaining that many separate identities had literally torn his mind apart. But Harper also found something else in the notes, a fragment of conversation with resonance of deep waters that suggested the Velhari had been trying to guide Walsh toward a different approach, one that he had rejected as too risky. Stone requested a private meeting with the Velhari representative, and in a chamber filled with shifting silver light, resonance of deep waters revealed the true purpose of the negotiations. The Velhari were not neutral observers, but rather mediators whose job was to find compromise solutions when the Council reached deadlock, and they had been watching human development for decades, looking for signs that humanity might serve a special role if galaxy had grown stagnant, with ancient species locked in their established patterns of thought and behavior, and the Velhari believed that humanity's chaotic nature and rapid adaptability might provide the catalyst needed to break the deadlock. But this possibility came with enormous risk. If humanity proved disruptive or destructive, they could destabilize the careful balance that had maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. Resonance of deep waters showed Stone recordings of similar situations from the past. Young species that had faced the Council's judgment and either been integrated into galactic civilization or eliminated as threatsome had become valuable members of the galactic community, while others had been destroyed when they proved too dangerous to allow continued existence, and humanity's fate would depend on which category they fell into. Velhari representative then revealed something that made Stone's blood run cold. 3 of the 12 species were absolutely determined to vote for humanity's extinction, regardless of any arguments or evidence. Hegemony believed that all younger species were inherently inferior and should be eliminated before they could threaten established order. The purists considered any species that had not evolved in isolation to be contaminated and dangerous, and the ancient Dominion viewed humanity as a threat to their position. As the galaxy's dominant civilization, these 3 species had made their decision based on ideology and fear rather than evidence, and no amount of negotiation could change their minds, because they were not actually listening to arguments about humanity's potential. Stone realized that, even if he could convince the other 9 species to support humanity, the 3 holdouts could still doom his species to extinction, and he needed to find a way to either change their minds or neutralize their influence. But the countdown timer showed only 8 days remaining, and Stone knew that conventional diplomacy had already failed with these species. Harper discovered one final piece of information in Walsh's notes. The dead ambassador had realized that the key to saving humanity lay not in defending human actions, but in demonstrating human values. Walsh had written about the importance of individual sacrifice for the greater good, about loyalty that transcended self-interest, about the willingness to risk everything for principles rather than survival. Stone began to understand that the Council was not just judging humanity's potential for future growth, but also testing their willingness to accept responsibility for their actions and their place in the galactic community. The 3 holdout species were waiting for humanity to demonstrate that they understood the weight of their decision, that they were willing to accept consequences for their choices, and that they could put the needs of galactic civilization above their own survivals. Stone prepared for the final session. He realized that saving humanity might require him to make a sacrifice that would cost him everything, but it was the only way to prove that humans understood what it meant to be worthy of a place among the stars. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders, and Stone knew that the next few days would determine not just whether humanity lived or died, but whether they deserved to call themselves a civilized species. Stone made his decision in the early hours of the final day. Instead of defending humanity, he would challenge the entire premise of the Council's judgment, and if it cost him his life, then at least he would die trying to save his species rather than watching them be destroyed by beings too ancient to remember what it meant to grow and learn. Entered the Council chamber wearing his full dress uniform, the medals and ribbons representing 20 years of service to humanity, and he carried with him a single data pad containing not defensive arguments, but accusations that would either save his species or guarantee their immediate destruction. The 12 species had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around the central platform where Stone stood, their alien forms representing millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of galactic dominance, and the weight of their combined attention felt like standing under the gaze of God. Stone began by doing something that no human diplomat had ever dared. He questioned the Council's right to judge humanity. Presented evidence that he had gathered from historical records, showing that each of the 12 species had gone through periods of violence, expansion, and cultural chaos during their own development, and he argued that judging humanity by standards that none of them had met during their own youth was fundamentally unfair. Korath had been savage raiders for centuries before developing their honor code. The Zephyrians had fought brutal civil wars before achieving collective consciousness. The Archons had destroyed entire star systems during their early expansion phase, and every species in the Council had blood on their hands from their past. Mistake. Stone's voice grew stronger as he continued his attack on the Council's moral authority, pointing out that they were not perfect beings dispensing justice, but rather survivors who had learned from their mistakes and now sought to deny other species the same opportunity to growth. Reaction was immediate and explosive. Several species began speaking at once, their representatives rising from their positions as ancient anger and defensive pride overrode diplomatic protocol, but Stone pressed his advantage, arguing that the real question was not whether humanity deserved to survive, but whether the Council had the wisdom and humility to guide them rather than simply eliminating them as inconvenient. He proposed something that had never been attempted in galactic history: a mentorship system where each species would take responsibility for guiding one aspect of human development. Transforming the Council from judges into teachers, Tharshans could help humanity learn patience and long-term thinking. The Zephyrians could teach the value of cooperation and collective decision-making. The Korath could instill honor and discipline in human military forces, and each species could contribute their wisdom while also learning from human adaptability and innovation. The proposal created chaos in the chamber, as species that had not spoken directly to each other in centuries began debating the merits and dangers of active involvement in human development. Stone watched the ancient beings argue among themselves and realized that his gambit was working. Instead of united opposition to humanity, he had created a situation where each species had to consider whether they were willing to invest in human potential. Resonance of deep waters rose from the Velhari delegation and spoke words that cut through the chaos like a blade. The human speaks wisdom that we have forgotten in our age. Perhaps it is time to remember what it means to nurture rather than simply to judge with energy. Beings called lumina pulsed with colors that Dr. Harper had taught Stone represented deep consideration, while the crystalline Valdris began generating mathematical equations that seemed to calculate the probability of successful mentorship. But the three holdout species remained unmoved by Stone's arguments. The hegemony representative declared that younger species were inherently inferior regardless of potential. The purist delegation insisted that any species that had not evolved in perfect isolation was contaminated, and the ancient dominion claimed that sharing power with humans would lead to galactic chaos. Stone realized that these three species were driven by fear and prejudice so deep that no logical argument could reach them, and he prepared to make the sacrifice that Walsh's notes had hinted at. Addressed the Council one final time, his voice carrying across the chamber with absolute certainty. If the Council could not trust humanity's potential, then perhaps they could trust humanity's willingness to accept responsibility for their actions. Stone offered himself as a permanent hostage to guarantee human behavior. He would remain on the station for the rest of his life as humanity's voice and advocate, his life forfeit if humans ever violated the terms of their probation. The gesture stunned the Council into silence. Here was a human willing to sacrifice his freedom, his future, his connection to his own species to guarantee their survival, and even the most hostile delegations had to acknowledge the honor. In such an off-Earth hegemony representative, a being of metallic scales and cold intelligence, admitted that Stone's willingness to accept personal consequences for species-wide decisions demonstrated a level of responsibility that they had not expected from humans. The purist delegation remained unmoved, but their leader acknowledged that Stone's offer showed that humans understood the weight of their position in the galactic community. The ancient dominion was impressed by what they saw as strategic wisdom. Offering a valuable hostage showed that humans understood the concept of acceptable losses and long-term planning, but it was the other 9 species who provided the real breakthrough. They began to see Stone's offer not as a desperate gambit, but as evidence that humans could indeed grow beyond their current limitations. Zephyrians recognized the sacrifice of individual desire for collective good. The Arshans saw the long-term thinking required to accept permanent exile, and the Korath respected the warrior's willingness to face any fate in defense of his peoples. The debate continued through the day and into the night. Stone stood in the center of the chamber, knowing that he had done everything possible to save humanity, and now their fate rested in the hands of beings so ancient that they remembered the birth of stars. The countdown timer reached its final hour, and Stone prepared to learn whether humanity would continue to explore the galaxy or become nothing more than a memory. An alien archivist weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on his shoulders, but for the first time since arriving at the station, Stone felt at peace with the choice he had made. The final vote began at dawn by Earth Standard Time, and Stone stood in the center of the council chamber, watching as each species considered the fate of humanity. With the weight of cosmic responsibility pressing down on all of Themersonance of deep waters, served as the vote counter, its silver form moving between the 12 delegations, as each species made their decision through methods that Stone could barely comprehend. The Zephyrians voted through bioelectric consensus, the Archons through mathematical harmonies that took hours to resolve, and the Korra through ritual combat between faction leader Stone had offered himself as a permanent guarantee of human behavior. But as the voting continued, it became clear that his sacrifice had changed the nature of the discussion. From judgment to something more complex, and Nuanshed's first surprise came when the hegemony announced that they were changing their vote from extermination to exile. Stone's willingness to accept personal consequences had convinced them that humans might be capable of the discipline required for civilized behavior, even if they were not ready. For full integration into Galactic Society's purest delegation remained unmoved by arguments about human potential, but their leader announced that they would abstain from the final vote rather than actively support extermination, acknowledging that Stone's offer demonstrated a level of species loyalty that they could respect, even if they could not approve. The ancient dominion shocked everyone. By voting for a limited form of integration, they proposed that humanity be given a probationary period in a distant sector of the galaxy, where they could develop under careful observation without threatening established civilizations. As the votes were tallied, Stone realized that his gambit had achieved something unprecedented. He had broken the ancient deadlock between isolationists and integrationists by proposing a third option that satisfied both camps. The mentorship system he had suggested appealed to species that wanted to guide younger civilizations, while the exile component satisfied those who wanted to maintain separation from potentially dangerous newcomersivan species. Voted for various forms of the mentorship program. 3 voted for exile to distant sectors, and 2 abstained, but none voted for the complete extermination that Stone had feared. Resonance of deep waters announced the Council's decision in words that rang across the chamber like the tolling of cosmic bells. Humanity would be permitted to survive, but under conditions that would test their ability to grow beyond their current limitations. The human species would be relocated to a distant galaxy sector where they could develop without threatening established civilizations, but they would also be assigned mentors from willing council species who would help guide their cultural and technological advancement. Stone would remain on the station as humanity's permanent representative, serving both as advocate for human interests and as guarantee that his species would honor their commitments to peaceful development. Harper would stay as his scientific advisor, helping to coordinate the mentorship programs and serving as a bridge between human and alien understanding of the universe. Other members of Stone's delegation would return to Earth to begin the massive task of preparing humanity for relocation. Entire colonies would need to be moved, new worlds would need to be terraformed, and 8 billion people would need to be convinced that exile was actually salvation. Stone felt a mixture of triumph and loss as he realized that he had saved humanity, but at the cost of never seeing Earth again, never walking under the sky of his birth world, never again experiencing the simple human pleasures that he had taken for granted. As he looked around the council chamber at the 12 species that had chosen to give humanity a chance rather than simply eliminating them, he knew that the sacrifice was worth it. Archon representative approached him after the formal ceremony ended, its ancient form moving with the slow dignity of geological time, and it spoke words that would stay with Stone for the rest of his life. You have shown us that wisdom is not the exclusive property of age, and perhaps we have grown too comfortable in our certainty. Koroth war leader offered a salute that Stone recognized as the highest honor their species could give to a non-warrior, while the Zephyrian collective hummed harmonies that Dr. Harper translated as expressions of deep respect. Even the hegemony delegate acknowledged that Stone had demonstrated qualities that they had not expected from such a young species, and the ancient Dominion leader admitted that humanity might indeed have something valuable to contribute to galactic civilization. As the council dispersed, and the various species began making preparations for humanity's relocation and mentorship, Stone stood alone in the chamber that had decided the fate of his species. He activated his communication system and began composing the message that would change human history forever. Humanity had earned their place among the stars, but now they would need to prove they deserved to keep it. Words came slowly, as Stone tried to explain to 8 billion people that they were being exiled from everything they had ever known, but that this exile was actually the greatest opportunity in human history. Humanity would have the chance to grow and learn under the guidance of species that had mastered the challenges that humans still faced, and in return they would bring their own unique perspectives and abilities to a galactic community that had grown static with age. Stone finished his message with words that he hoped would inspire rather than terrify. We have been given a chance to become something greater than what we are, and the universe is waiting to see what humanity can become when we reach our full potential. As he sent the message toward Earth, Stone looked out through the station's transparent walls at the stars that would soon contain human colonies in distant sectors, and he felt a deep satisfaction that came from knowing he had given his species the greatest gift possible. A future among the stars. Last human Negotiator had become the first human teacher, and his real work was just beginning as he prepared to help guide humanity toward a destiny that none of them could yet imagine. Harper joined him at the viewing wall, and together they watched the stars that would soon be home to scattered human settlements, each one a testament to the power of words spoken at the right moment to the right audience. With the weight of 8 billion lives behind them, Stone had saved humanity by offering himself as their guarantee, and now he would spend the rest of his life helping them prove worthy of the chance they had been given.